promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar, 1 o'clock in Porto Novo. Good afternoon, and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM. Welcome to Newslink, and here are the top stories. Burkinabe authorities set May 25 and 26 for national meetings to decide on the follow-up to the transition. Reactions continue to trail the recommendations in Bamako of the Inter-Malian dialogue.
We should avoid this extension. We should rather look towards the organization of the elections, whether or not Assimi Goïta is president.
La France Insoumise leader is in Senegal to strengthen relationship with Prime Minister Sonko.
The political leader of the left, what we call the extreme left, Mélenchon, has always shown his support and encouragement for the leaders of the PASTEF. So it is quite natural that he is invited.
Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire host exercise Flintlock 2024, U.S. Africa Command's largest special operations exercise.
Because of the shared values that all the countries have with Ghana, we are to have the interoperability, jointness in training, jointness in exercise, to be able to be professionally enhanced.
Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is a more edit with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining us, and a warm welcome to our listeners in the Gambia, Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Well, let's begin this edition in Burkina Faso, where the authorities have announced they will hold national consultations at the end of this month to determine the next steps in the country's transition to civilian rule. The landlocked nation has been run by a military regime since mutinying soldiers deposed elected President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore in 2022. Speaking Tuesday evening on state television RTV, the Minister of Territorial Administration, Decentralization and Security, Emilia Zebo, explained the meetings will bring together representatives from civil society and political parties and the military to take stock of the past month.
Le 26 avril dernier, l'ALT a paru une loi.
To follow up on the transition of more than 2 weeks after the law was passed, the government has set May 25th and 26th as the dates for its April 26th meeting. The House had passed a law allowing the government to organize the meeting within 1 month, so we had to work hard to meet this deadline, which is why we chose the dates of May 25th and 26th. A committee has already been set up to organize the meeting, and it has to be said that this is a major responsibility for Burkina Faso.
Schématiquement, elles ne seront pas différentes des assises passées. Il s'agit des mêmes forces vives qui vont se rassembler. Il s'agit, par exemple,
schematically, they will be no different from past, besides they are the same driving forces that will come together, for example, civil society, political parties, defense and security forces, to name but a few, who are going to get together to take stock of the past few months, and who are going to decide whether the transition should be continued, and if so, how. It will be up to them to decide. In a sovereign way, it must be said that they have the opportunity not only to make any necessary changes to define our outline of the country's course after the July date of the transition, they have the possibility to make other types of amendments for an improvement of the future course of our country.
On va dire butoir de la transition en cours, elles ont la possibilité de faire d'autres types d'amendements pour une amélioration de la future marche de notre pays.
Last month, all 71 members of the Legislative Assembly for Transition approved a plan for a transition forum, leaving it to the sovereign people who will meet during the National Forum to decide the development of the transition. Meanwhile, still in Burkina Faso, several dozen civilians were killed last week by armed men in the eastern region. According to sources, this deadly assault took place in several villages as a supply convoy passed through. It is difficult to know the exact death toll, but the victims included men, women, and children. Let's listen to testimonies of survivors who reached by telephone in a village near the commune of Geyari.
They arrived in our village in the afternoon. We did not know that things would happen like this because before that, we had told those who did not have an identity card to avoid walking. And because we were in a war zone, when they arrived, one of them approached us and asked to show our national identity cards from a distance. He did not even approach people but suddenly started shooting at them. Some started to flee. When he finished, he continued and moved towards the yard where my grandfather was sitting with 2 children. He opened the door and shot at them at the end. In a neighboring house, a man sitting with his wife was shot. A bit further was another neighboring house. One was pregnant, another had just given birth a week ago, and an old woman. The man killed the old woman, the pregnant woman, and one who had just given birth, and 2 children. Meanwhile, others came to join in. They continued like this in the village. We don't know what happened. We were far from imagining that they would treat us like that. There were 21 deaths in our home and 26 in a nearby courtyard. We have so far counted 54 people killed, including women, children, and men. Under the shed, there were 7 more deaths.
Survivor in Gayari commune speaking there. Malians in Bamako continue to react to the recommendations of the National Inter-Malian Dialogue that was presented to the transitional leader on Monday. The extension of the transition period and Kalassimi Goita's candidacy for the next presidential election have been met with mixed reviews. In recent days, these conclusions have been contested by political and civil society players. Sankli Janko has details of this report by our correspondent Ali Cham in Bamako.
On the streets of the Malian capital, the debates go on. While some agree to the recommendations emerging from the Inter-Malian dialogue, others are against it. Shannon Tangara says he is not surprised by the conclusions. He suggests organizing an election as soon as possible.
This proposal was predictable because there was a hidden intention beyond it from the very beginning. We should avoid this extension. We should rather look towards the organization of the elections. Whether or not Assimi Goita is president is okay by me, so long elections are organized and that we get to choose a leader to lead the country.
However, Amadou Kone does not share this assertion. The young man welcomes the decision for an extension of the transition, but only for a short time.
We can extend the transition to have a little more time to really fix all these problems. That's not a problem either. But when it comes to taking 5 years, then I think that's a problem. That's too much.
In a recent communique, the coalition of political parties rejected these recommendations. For them, their only objective is to keep the military in power.
Sankli Janko voiced that report filing by our Bamako correspondent Ali Cham. Now, Nigeria has suspended a planned levy on domestic money transfer. Nigeria has suspended a planned levy on domestic money transfers to fund cybersecurity, according to Information Minister Mohammed Idris on Tuesday, amid widespread public criticism of the scheme as the cost of living rises and the naira currency falls. Recall the central bank in a circular last week told all banks and mobile money operators to charge 0.5% of the value of electronic transfers as a cyber security levy starting in 2 weeks.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Well, let's come back home here to Senegal, where the leader of the French left-wing party La France Insoumise, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, began a visit to Senegal on Tuesday. At the invitation of the Prime Minister and leader of the ruling party, PASTEF, the French politician comes to consolidate the links between his party and that of the new Senegalese authorities. In a press release, Ousmane Sonko's party indicated that its guests will stay in Dakar until Friday. Well, who benefits from this relationship between Francis Insoumise and PASTEF? Professor Moussa of Gaston-Berger, University of St. Louis, an expert in political science, international relations, and geopolitics, provides some insights.
The political leader of the left, what we call the extreme left, Mélenchon, has always shown his support and encouragement for the leaders of the PASTEF. So it is quite natural that he is invited, that Mélenchon is invited to Senegal to make this friendship concrete and strengthen the cooperation between these political leaders. Talking about who benefits from this, it may be links for the left because there is a certain understanding and the left has always shown its attachment to freedom. It wishes for African countries to have their political autonomy, to take their decisions and according to their own interests. I think it is a comprehension of these movements that are drawn at the level of Africa that are coming together. Precisely these two conceptions of society and the fight together for political change at the African level and, of course, globally.
Well, we do have more on the story on our guest interview segment, and of course we'll be having Professor Musa Joe giving us full details in this. Well, in Niger, resident of the town of Gaya on the border with Benin organized a demonstration on Tuesday in support of the transitional authorities. The city, which is in the south of Niger, remains closed to people from Benin. Through the peaceful demonstration, the inhabitants of the town of Gaya gave their support to the Nigerian transitional authorities and the standoff between them and Benin. Local authorities have welcomed this show of support for the Nigerian authorities. Recall last weekend, Prime Minister Mohamed Lamin Zain announced that the area remains closed until further notice for security reasons. Now let's take you back to Nigeria, where President Bola Tinubu has launched the hashtag We Are Equal campaign, an initiative of the Organization of African First Ladies for Development, OAFLAD, aimed at promoting inclusive education, skill development, and gender equity. The Nigerian component of the program, tagged Education as a Power Tool for Change, is championed by First Lady of Nigeria, Senator Oluremi Tinubu. WD House Usman Marin Abuja tells us more.
The campaign focuses on health, education, economic empowerment, and gender-based violence and has been launched in 15 African countries. President Bola Tinubu emphasized the importance of education in achieving gender equity and narrowing the gender gap across the continent.
We must work together, promote laws and policies that protect and promote women's rights, invest in the girls, their education and skill development.
The president noted that the launch coincided with the introduction of the Alternative High School for Girls, an initiative that offers a second chance for young girls who have dropped out of school to continue their education. Also speaking, First Lady of Nigeria, Senator Oluremi Tinubu, and Rachel Ruto, First Lady of Kenya, emphasized that education is the cornerstone of national development, and empowering girls to pursue their dreams is essential for nations to succeed.
As an educationist and lifelong teacher, stems from the desire to see young girls and women who dropped out of school due to several challenges, financial reasons, and many more have a second chance to complete high school, acquire higher education, and valuable life skills.
We will ensure that all girls and boys complete primary and secondary schooling by 2030, in line with Goal 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals.
According to a 2020 UNESCO report, Nigeria has one of the world's highest numbers of out-of-school girls, with an estimated 13.5 million girls, making up about 60% of out-of-school children in the country. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Omar reporting from Abuja.
Staying in Nigeria, where the United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator has projected that about 5.9 million Nigerian children face severe food and nutrition crisis. The figure is said to be the highest globally, with 700,000 of these children under the age of 5, HRTC reports.
According to Mohammed IV, the United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Nigeria, the most malnourished children are in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states. He added that 4.8 million Nigerians are at risk of food crisis in this year's lean season, which is from June to September, and further worsened by issues like flooding, inflation, and the war in Ukraine, which has made food access more difficult. Speaking at the launch of the 2024 Lean Season Food Security and Nutrition Crisis Multi-Sector Plan, Ford said with a sum of 306 million naira targeting 2.8 million people, this crisis can be prevented. Nigeria recently declared a national emergency on food security after a record inflation made basic foods unaffordable for many. The 2024 Lean Plan seeks to harmonize with existing government investments and actions in the areas of food assistance, health, water, and sanitation, with the targets being northeastern states such as Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe.
HRTC filed that report. You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM Dakar, Senegal. Here is a reminder of our top stories. The Kanabi authorities set May 25 and 26 for national meetings to decide on the follow-up to the transition. Reactions continue to trail the recommendations in Bamako of the Inter-Malian dialogue. La France Insoumise leader is in Senegal to strengthen relationship with Prime Minister Sonko. And still ahead, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire host exercise Flintlock 2024, the U.S. Africa Command's largest special operations exercise. We do have a press review segment, a guest interview, and sports news. Please stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
Well, don't forget, we are streaming live on wadr.org, YouTube, and Facebook. Let's take you now to Ghana, where the armed forces said there is a need for continuous enforcement of security in the northern parts of the country. Accordingly, this is to forestall any incident of spillover violence from conflict-hit neighboring countries such as Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, especially as the country heads into its general elections in December. This comes as Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire host exercise Flintlock 2024, the U.S. Africa Command's largest special operations exercise. This is the second consecutive time the two countries are jointly hosting the exercise. From Accra, Nadia Tete reports.
Approximately 1,300 participants from nearly 30 international and African partner nations are taking part in the exercise that began on May 13 and will end on May 27, 2024. Exercise Flintlock is designed to strengthen collective security, enable greater cross-border collaborations between African partners, reinforce military bonds and the trust of the civilian populace, as well as augment tactics, techniques, procedures, and skill sets to address common threats. Speaking to the media at the opening of the ceremony in Accra, Deputy Chief Staff Officer in charge of operations and training at the Ghana Army Headquarters, Brigadier General Kweku Dankwa Hagan, said that the exercise will facilitate adherence to cooperation on transnational security and enhance interoperability, as well as joint missions of partner nations.
Because of the shared values that all the countries have with Ghana, we are to have the interoperability, jointness in training, jointness in exercise, to be able to be professionally enhanced to protect our countries and the people within the sub-region.
The SOCA Africa Director of Operations, U.S. Navy Captain Scott Fentress, commended both partner nations for their contributions to the success of Flintlock.
With all things, we try to build on what we've learned, and we also try to establish additional trust and relationships with those countries that we're working with, and be able to use innovation tools and a more of a whole of government approach instead of just something that is so singular in nature.
Captain Fentress lauded Ghana for promoting good governance and democracy, thereby serving as a model for other partners and nations. In Ghana, exercise Flintlock will take place in the Greater Accra region, Tamale in the northern region, and Damongo in the Savannah region. For WADR, Nadedi Tete, Accra.
This is the newspaper review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the newspaper review.
The newspaper review.
Well, let's now join Darlington Popper in Monrovia for the newspaper review.
For today's edition of Press Review, we have the Heritage newspaper, the News newspaper, and the New Dawn newspaper. We begin the review process with the Heritage newspaper. Change of regime, change of dress style, as Conte Club gradually overtaking pro suit. And we see the photograph of Her Excellency President Joseph Yuma Boakai, well dressed in the traditional attire on the front page of the Heritage newspaper. No single chance to become president again, says Senator DeLong of ex-President George Weah on the back page of the Heritage newspaper. Government to repatriate 4,000 Liberians from the Bujumbura refugee camp. A high-power Liberian government delegation is expected to leave the country today for Ghana to begin the repatriation of more than 4,000 stranded Liberians. It followed the demolition of the Bujumbura refugee camp, which was hosting them. The delegation includes representatives from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Liberia Refugee Repatriation Resettlement Commission, and the Ministries of Information, gender, children, and social protection, among others. We will leave it right there. Local Voices Liberia, OKFM Renew, fast-checking agreement. New BWR Principal Freeman takes office today. From the Heritage newspaper, the newspaper is next. Investment on a threat. Protest disrupts Astrometas operation. Government World Bank tour $42 million United States dollars hospital project. On the back page of the newspaper, officers suspect a killer charged with murder. We will leave it right there. Stay on the front page of the New Dawn newspaper. We are returning on the ballots for money on the back page of the New Dawn newspaper. Be patient. Your term is near. Gonglo anointed for presidency. The rest of the articles on the back page of the New Dawn newspaper are all advertisements. On a note, that is, I would love to conclude today's edition of Press Review, but before we go, these are the newspapers we actually followed on today's edition. We followed the Heritage newspaper, the newspaper, and the New Dawn newspaper was our last stop. On that note, thank you so much for following, and bye-bye.
Many thanks, Darlington Popade Monrovia with the newspaper review.
Politics, analyses on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Well, reactions have been trailing the visit of the French left-wing party La France Insoumise leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon to Senegal. The French politician comes to consolidate the links between his party and that of the new Senegalese authorities at the invitation of the Prime Minister and leader of the ruling PASTEF party. Well, in a press release, Ousmane Sonko's party indicated that the guests will stay in Dakar until Friday. Earlier, WDR's Demba Ma'an had a chat with Professor Moussa Diop of Gaston-Berger, University of St. Louis, an expert in political science, international relations and geopolitics, who provides some insights.
C'est une ouverture vers l'étranger, vers la France.
It's an opening to the outside world, to France, to relations between Senegal and France, particularly for political leaders who won the March 25 elections and who are renewing ties with political leaders who supported them during the campaign and during the hard period of struggle for political change, and political leaders of the left, what we call the far left. Mélenchon has always shown his support and encouragement for the leaders of PASTEF. So it's only natural that Mélenchon should be invited to Senegal to give concrete expression to this friendship and strengthen cooperation between these two political leaders.
Donc c'est tout à fait naturel que Renaud soit invité, que Mélenchon soit invité au Sénégal pour concrétiser cette amitié et renforcer la coopération entre ces leaders politiques.
Alors, à qui va profiter?
Who will benefit from this rapprochement between PASTEF and France Insoumise?
C'est peut-être des liens de gauche, parce qu'il y a une certaine compréhension.
Perhaps it's a link between the left because there is a certain understanding, and the left has always shown its attachment to freedom, to the struggles of certain African countries to achieve political autonomy, to take charge of their destiny in their own interests. I think it's an understanding of these movements that are taking shape in Africa, and these two conceptions that are also to be found in Africa are similar to what's happening elsewhere.
De la société et de lutte ensemble pour le changement politique au niveau africain de façon globale.
Et la France Insoumise.
Who will benefit from this rapprochement between PASTEF and France Insoumise?
Cette visite de ses membres pourrait apporter au parti d'Ousmane Sonko.
Ça pourrait renforcer la coopération entre leaders.
It could strengthen cooperation between leaders and change the identity and conception of this very struggle that the French left is waging, and a better understanding of the action of Africans who want the distancing of relations between France and Africa, especially French-speaking Africa. This Africa is often under the control of France's foreign policy, particularly when it comes to currency. I think it's the motivation and this understanding that are making the left and Mélenchon in particular take an interest in these movements that are springing up, leading to a new understanding of relations between Africa and France.
S'intéresse à ces mouvements qui naissent, qui une nouvelles élites au niveau africain, qui ont une autre compréhension des relations que peuvent avoir la France et les États africains.
Le parti au pouvoir qui
La France Insoumise has several elected members in the French parliament. What could this visit by these members bring to Sonko's party?
Oui, c'est mal perçu.
Yes, it's badly perceived because it shows that French foreign policy is being abused in Africa. We've seen this between France and a number of African states that are now under military control, such as Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, which have shown their willingness to break with France, especially in the military sphere. So the fact that the left can forge relations without going through the state may be frowned upon. But at the same time, states maintain relations based on their own interests. I think that if we refer to General de Gaulle, who said that states have no enemies, have no friends, they only have interests, so we can well understand the new orientations of African leaders, especially those of Senegal, to forge relations based on the closeness of their relationship or the same shared conceptions of the action to be taken in African states, also based on interests of their respective nations. In view of all this, we can well understand the relations between leaders and Mélenchon's visit to Senegal at the invitation of Ousmane Sonko, leader of PASTEC.
That was Professor Moussa Joe of Gassenberg, University of St. Louis. Well, let's join Sanklu Janko for sports news.
Hello out there, warm welcome and thank you for joining us. The Confederation of African Football on Tuesday declared that all 20 players presented by Nigeria for the WAFU B on 17 championship starting Accra, Ghana on Wednesday had passed the examination with flying colours, according to media reports in Nigeria. The declaration of eligibility of all the 20 players is testimony that the tests conducted on players by the Nigeria Football Federation before the team's departure were good, it has been reported. This makes the entire 20 players available for the tournament, which is set to take place in Ghana. Nigeria is going to the tournament hoping to defend their title. The Eaglets begin their defense of the title when they confront their counterparts from Burkina Faso at the University Stadium on Thursday, 16 May, with kickoff at 3 p.m. Ghana time. Nigeria's subsequent matches will be an encounter against Niger Republic on Sunday, and their final group game will be against Togo on Wednesday, 22 May 2023. And that's it for sports. It's back to you.
And we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maudoju for the technical support. Let's keep the conversation coming on all of our social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram at WDR News, and Facebook West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is our flagship gender program, 50-50. I am Imo Edet. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via